We're missing our court reporter for starters. Ready? All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. All parties are again present. Mr. Simpson is present with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Scheck, Mr. Blasier, people represented by Mr. Darden, Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Clark. The jury is not present. The record should reflect that this morning the court had a conference with counsel in chambers concerning certain demonstrative evidence items prepared by the prosecution. The first was the LAPD additional evidence disposition, which has been previously marked as People's 209. Court will allow the use without commentary regarding what was done with the items represented, which are the substate controls, while they were in the possession of the defense and made available at that time for their examination. There is a second board that is entitled Defense Testing, and I'm sustaining the defense objection to the title of that board. And for simplicity purposes, Mr. Goldberg, I would suggest at this point that we mark that as People's 210. Is that agreeable to the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
And I'm going to direct Mr. Fairlow to cover the title of the board as defense testing, since at this point it's not appropriate to comment on whether or not any testing has been accomplished or done by the defense.
Yeah, Your Honor, is the court going to have a stipulation prepared, or will we be able to ask Mr. Matheson whether these items were turned over in October of last year?
You'll be able to ask him if those items were turned over and that they were returned at some point in time, and that's it.
I believe you used the word examination when in chambers we used the word inspection.
Inspection.
Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Matheson is here, and Mr. Goldberg, you can consult with him on that. All right, as to a third board that was shown to the court, which has various depictions of item 13, the socks, court will sustain the defense objection at this time to the board itself. However, the photograph of the single sock, the objection is overruled. All right, anything else we need to put on the record before we invite the jurors to rejoin us?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Goldberg?
No.
All right, let's have the jury. Let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Mr. Gregory Matheson, would you resume the witness stand, please? Mr. Matheson is again on the witness stand, undergoing direct examination by Mr. Goldberg. Good morning, Mr. Matheson.
Good morning.
Mr. Matheson, you were reminded, sir, you are still under oath. Mr. Goldberg, you may continue with your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Matheson. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Matheson, when we left off yesterday, we were talking about the creation of Fitzco cards from the reference files. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Right. I wanted to show you what we previously marked as 163L for identification. See if you can tell us what this type of item is.
This is an example of a type of blood swatch card that we purchase. It has an outer envelope for protection inside, contains an area where you could record some information about the items, and then 4 circles that are in a filter type paper, approximately 1 inch in diameter, where you put the blood.
Can you hold that up so the jurors can see what you're talking about?
4092 indicates you can't see that. If you want to pass that through the jury box?
Sure. I also passed the envelope that
Yes.
came in. To mark another exhibit while the jurors are.
Yes.
I'd like to mark as People's 211 for identification. As 211A, what appears to be a photograph of item number 60.
I'm sorry, that was item number 16?
60.
60.
As 211B, what appears to be item number 59.
All right,
And as
211B.
211C, what appears to be item number 17. The Fitzco cards. I placed the numbers on the reverse of the photographs.
All right. All right, Deputy Russell, would you turn that to Mr. Goldberg? All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Mr. Matheson, I'd now like to show you the photographs that have been marked as People's 211A through C for identification. Is the resolution high enough for you to see those on your screen?
I could see the items and what's displayed there. The writing is difficult to discern.
Did you take a look at these photographs prior to coming into court today, last night?
Yes, I did.
All right. And with respect to these 3 items, what are they, first of all?
All three items are cards similar to the type that was just displayed in the courtroom here that are used to preserve liquid blood samples. Portions of a liquid sample is applied to the 4 different squares of the card. The best way to preserve a sample is dried and frozen, so that way we have portions of the blood rather than just keeping it in a vial in the best possible form.
Do you do your testing or some of your testing from these cards as opposed to the blood vials themselves?
As far as the conventional typing goes, it's all done directly from the blood vial. These we started using in our laboratory with the advent of DNA typing.
All right. Now, in many of the photographs that we've seen of the packaging materials, in this case, there are these cards at the bottom. What are those? The ones that have the DR number and the date.
Those cards are placed in there by the photographer. They have the DR number, date, and what's called a C number, which references back to the order number for the photography.
Is that something that's standard when your SID photographer is taking photographs such as these?
Well, it's standard for something like that to show up in at least one frame of a roll of film or a sequence of photographs regarding the evidence.
Okay, and with respect to the photograph that's 211A, on the bindle there are some initials, if you can see them, that are CY. Can you see that?
No, I can't make it out on the picture.
Okay. Who's that?
The CY are the initials of Colin Yamauchi, a criminalist that works in the serology unit.
And what is the C2?
C2 refers to a designation that we gave the initial exemplars that were involved in this case. It was decided that due to confidentiality, we would give a arbitrary indication, C1, C2, and C3, to the exemplar, or portions of the exemplars that were submitted to Cellmark Diagnostics for analysis.
Is that something that's standard or was just done in this case?
It was done in this case. We haven't done that before.
And C2 then was Nicole Brown.
Yes, it was.
Who was C1?
C1 was Mr. Simpson.
And C...
And object on foundational grounds previously stated. Continue to object.
Noted.
And C3?
C3 was Mr. Goldman's sample.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I was also going through the board that we marked as People's 177, the evidence disposition. Can I see the board that has number 78, item number 78 on it? And I'd like to mark as my next exhibit. That's 212, a document that says serology item description notes.
All right, People 212. Mr. Blasier, do you have a copy of that? Need the easel over here.
I'm going to place a 212 on the reverse of the document. Sir, direct your attention to People's 177, and this is the exhibit that has 59 through 82 on it. Looking at item number 78, the packaging, did you do some testing yourself on that item?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you take some swatches from that item?
Yes.
What was that? What is the item?
Well, the item number 78, are a pair of white shoes with red stains on them.
Okay. Now, in reviewing the records in order to verify this board, did you see a record that pertained to the entry 78 swatch and the date 7/20/94 with Mr. Yamauchi's name?
Yes, I did. The name appears on the board here. I recognize the document as one prepared by him.
Okay, can we see that next document as People's 212?
That's all right. I'll just, to save time, I'll just show you People's 212 for identification.
Can you tell us what that is?
This is a serology item description note page filled out by Mr. Yamauchi, indicating the swatching or sampling of some stains under the what appears to be the left shoe from item number 78.
And you previously described this type of document. Is this type of document actually generated at the time that the actual analysis or swatching is being performed?
Yes, it is.
And you have sketches on these very often, is that correct?
Yes.
And does the analyst sketch out or try to sketch out where the swatch or cutting came from when they're taking a swatch or a cutting?
Yes, normally.
Right. Did Mr. Yamauchi do that here?
Yes.
Sustained.
Is there a sketch on this particular document indicating where the swatches came from?
Yes, there is.
All right. And I wanted to ask you another question about the items that were recovered by you from the carpet from the Bronco. That was People's 172. If we could see that board again. It's People's 172. Sir, directing your attention back to People's 172 for identification and the photograph in the middle on the bottom that has the number 293 in it. Do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
Do you know who is pointing to that item with the red pen?
I believe that's my hand.
And when you collected this item 293, did you collect it from the carpet that's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, I did.
And you previously discussed how you did that. You used the method of just cutting rather than cloth swatch.
That's correct.
Now, what item number is the carpet itself?
I believe it's item number 33.
And that was recovered by Mr. Fung, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in terms of the swatching that was done on the console of the Bronco, that you said that you could see prior to when you did your swatching, do you feel that more sample should have been taken from those areas, 30 and 31?
Yes, I feel the problem.
It's a Stanford Fred's
Well,
question.
when they were initially swatched.
Yes, I did. Upon seeing the blood that was present, I believe that probably more should have been taken originally.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, there was stains present on the console, and that's a hard surface. It's a non-porous surface. The blood is just sitting right on top. It's fairly easy to remove, but it also can be fairly thin. I would have, probably the best thing to have done would have been to have removed more of the sample originally on the first search.
When you removed more sample from those locations, was all of it gone by the time you were finished?
No, it was not.
How much was left?
Oh, I don't remember.
But there was some left.
There was visible staining left, yes.
If you're removing staining that covers a fairly large area on a wall, for example, how do you decide how much of that stain to remove if it's a smear that covers maybe a square foot?
Well, given the different types that are available to us now, I would, in a situation like that, would probably want to collect 4 or 5 swatches, average maybe quarter-inch square swatches, something like that. Maybe a little more. It depends on whether there's other evidence available.
But would you necessarily cover the whole square foot?
No, I probably would not take it all.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'd like to mark as people's next in order the additional LAPD evidence disposition board. That's 213. Maybe Mr. Fairtlow can put that up for us while he's there. Oh, sorry, I think we previously marked this before we
Yes,
started
that's
as 209.
209.
Sir, direct your attention to what's been previously marked as People's 209 for identification. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And have you had the opportunity to look at this document to verify it against the records that are maintained by the Scientific Investigations Division?
Yes, I did.
Did you go through the same type of verification process that you described yesterday afternoon when I was asking you about the other evidence disposition boards?
That's correct.
Now, with respect to item number 6, was a control swatch of item number 6 sent somewhere on February 17th?
Yes, it was.
And what records did you have to look at in order to verify that?
Well, there were a number of notes that were made by the individuals that prepared and sent those samples. Ended up being many pages worth of notes.
Were those notes that were prepared at the time that the samples were actually being packaged for transmittal or shipping?
Yes, they were.
Now, in addition to the documentation procedures that you described just now and yesterday, was there any photo documentation that occurred?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, prior to the items that were shipped out or delivered out, that during those dates in February, All of the items were described and photographed prior to their release.
And does the photograph that's in the cell under item number for number 6 depict the photo documentation that was done? Let me see.
Yes, it does.
But it's just... Now, in the bindle that's in item number 6, was there anything other than the control?
No, there's not.
And sir, where did these items that were sent out on the 17th go to?
To a laboratory in Albany, New York.
Do you know who brought them there?
They actually went out in a couple of different shipments. I believe DA investigators transported them.
Okay. And when did these various items that went out on the 17th come back?
Well, they came back also in a couple of different shipments, but in and around February 22nd.
Now, with respect to item number 6, when it came back, or after it came back, was it photo documented again?
Yes, it was.
Can you give us the date that it was photo documented?
You'd have to refer to the
Yeah.
photograph. The date reflects February 27th, 1995.
Now, on the date that it was photo documented, were you notified by someone to come and look at that bindle?
Yes, I was.
And what did you do?
Well, I was asked to come back to the serology unit to take a look at the contents of that bindle.
What did you see?
A portion of the control plus a hair.
And is that depicted in the photo documentation that was done on the 27th?
Yes.
Perhaps we could, with the court's permission, just move this board down so that the jurors can see it.
Yes.
So, Mr. Matheson, as to item number 6, was there a hair that was not there in the bindle when it was sent to the defense on February 17th, found in the bindle when it was photo documented on February the 27th?
That's correct.
Right. And what happened to item number 6, the control, after the 27th of February?
I'm going to object. May we approach briefly?
Yes, with the court reporter.
Thank you. Mr. Matheson, to your knowledge, was the purpose of the items that went out on February the 17th to allow the defense to inspect those items?
That was my understanding, yes.
Right. Now, after the 27th, as to item number 6, what happened to that item?
It was sent to the Department of Justice.
And on the column that says back to SID, what does that mean?
Well, that references when items are returned back to our facility.
And certain items on the, say, return to evidence control unit on 22295, item 656 and 305, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And who did that?
The actual return of those items,
To the evidence control unit.
I believe I did. I'd have to reference my notes to be sure.
Okay. And that, maybe you can double check your notes.
I have the notes on other items that were returned on 2/22nd, having a difficult time locating these particular items.
Well, can you tell from your other notes who returned those? Or can you?
Well, there were items that were returned by Mr. Raquel to ECU on the 22nd.
Okay. That's all right. But when you reviewed this board initially, did you check some document to see that these particular items were returned to ECU on the 22nd?
I checked documents that were in a notebook at the DA's office. I did not bring all the notes that we have associated with, just
Okay.
things that I was directly involved with.
Now, with respect to the cell on number 6 where it says DOJ 22895, does that reflect the date that it went out?
Yes.
And the coin envelope on that particular cell is an original envelope or a transmittal envelope?
I'll have to take a look at the picture. That particular envelope is one that was prepared by Mr. Yamauchi, not the original envelope.
Now, with respect to number 7, did you go through the same verification process that you just described with respect to number 6?
Yes, I did.
All right. And you also looked at the photographs to verify that they were, in fact, photographs that were prepared by the items that were prepared by the analyst that actually did the shipping?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the items that are numbered 12 and 49 that say returned on 3/9/95 from DOJ, did you verify that those were in fact returned on that date?
Yes.
And do you know who actually put them back in ECU?
Not at this point, no.
Okay, but at any rate, you did verify that that either yourself or one of your criminalists did that.
That's correct.
And what about the items that were returned on 11/22/94, 13 and 305?
Yes.
Okay, you verified that those were in fact returned on that date and rebooked into ECU.
But they were returned on that date. They were not rebooked into the unit or into ECU at that time.
At that time, where did they go?
They were stored in the serology freezer.
Okay. And with respect to 305, was that one of the items that you removed from the Bronco?
As item number 305, that's correct.
Okay. And when it came back, it was rebooked as another item number?
Yes.
Why was that?
That is a procedure that we had in place regarding evidence that was submitted to outside agencies for analysis. Whenever, as I described earlier, there are types of DNA analysis that we don't perform in our laboratory. So when we want that work done, we send it out to Cellmark Diagnostics for them to perform the testing. It was our policy that the items would be sent out to the laboratory, then what we received back from Cellmark would be rebooked as a new item. We would not necessarily go through it, but retain it in its sealed condition from that laboratory, create a new item number for it, and return it to our evidence control unit.
So when 305 rebooked as 401, once it came back from the Department of Justice, was sent out to the Department of Justice again on May the 9th, was it sent out under item number 401 or 305?
Well, the date when it was sent back out is March the 9th,
I'm sorry, yeah, right.
and it would have been sent out as 401, referencing it back to 305.
Okay. And did you also check the icons on these to see that it was just swatches that were sent out on 6, 7, 12, 49, 56, and 305?
Yes, I did.
And you looked at the transmittal envelopes that are in the column that says to outside lab to verify those?
Yes.
Now, with respect to item number 13, there's an entry under the date to defense, the column to defense on 2/16/95 at SID. What is that reference?
That references a viewing of that item or an inspection of that item within our laboratory. It didn't actually get sent anywhere.
So it didn't actually leave the laboratory on that particular, well, it didn't leave the laboratory to go to the defense on that date.
That's correct. That's within the SID facility.
And did it leave the laboratory to go somewhere on 2/16?
Yes, it did,
Where?
to the FBI.
And as to item number 17, the envelope containing a vial of blood, was that entire envelope and blood vial sent somewhere on April the 3rd?
Yes, it was,
And where was it sent?
to the FBI.
Okay, thank you. Now, on June the 29th of last year, did you participate in an inventory that was done at the Los Angeles Police Department of certain of the evidence in this case?
Yes, I did.
And who was present during that inventory?
That inventory was performed with myself, Mr. Yamauchi was present, and Ms. Kessler.
And did you look at the SOX item number 13, bearing the DR number in this case, during that inventory?
Yes, I did.
Was that the first time that you actually saw that item?
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to mark as people's next in order, I think it's 213, a page from the inventory sheet of 629. I think it's the second page.
All right, 213. Can you fine focus that just a little more?
Still a little bit out of focus. Can we see, can you see the area that says 13 SOX?
Yes, I can.
And can you read what it says to the right of the SOX? Is that navy blue / black?
I made out the black, and as soon as you mentioned the navy blue, that is what is written there with the slash.
Okay. Whose handwriting is this?
That's mine.
Now, okay. If we can see the other end of this column, 13. Can we get a little bit more? Can we see the top of the document too? Now, sir, there are 3 columns that you can see in this frame. One is analysis performed. That's on the left as we're looking at the document now. What does that refer to?
That was an area where we could record what type of work had been done on that item up to that date.
And for item number 13, did you record anything in that column?
No, I did not,
Why not?
because nothing had been done with that item yet.
And then there's a column that says comments that's on the right as we're looking at this document.
That's correct.
And what's that for?
Well, that was any sort of comment, either a greater description of the item, miscellaneous information about it, potentially what additional work we would be doing with that item.
What did you write in that column?
In quotes, I have dress socks to give me an indication that they are, a thin dress style sock rather than a heavy athletic sock or something like that. I have the words blood search indicating that it's our intent to do that at some point. And then I also have in parentheses, none obvious.
Well, did you actually do a blood search on this day, on the 29th?
It's just a quick visual inspection of the item.
So why did you say blood search to be done?
Because that was not an analysis at that point. We opened them up, took a look at them, and indicated that that's something that we'd someday be performing.
Why did you want to perform one in the future?
It seemed like a legitimate thing to do on that piece of evidence. It was an item of clothing. The quick inspection that was done in the office was insufficient, particularly due to its color, and we were not there to do a scientific analysis. It was something that was planned.
Well, shouldn't you be able to see blood if there was blood on there?
It depends on the color and the type of material it's on.
How often in your experience as a serologist do you find blood on fabrics based upon testing that you did not see with your eyes?
Well, it happens occasionally. It's not a regular thing. The conditions have to be just right to make it difficult to see.
What are those conditions?
Most notably, black materials, like a black leather jacket, very difficult to see blood on. Black denim, Levi's, that type of thing, difficult to see blood on, and black material.
Okay. I'd like to mark as people's next in order a photograph depicting one that says sock A on the reverse, and it has a little writing up in the upper right-hand corner that says 13A as
Right.
people's 214.
14.
Can I make that 214A?
Yes. Since it's sake. And Mr. Blasier, you've seen that? All right.
And as 214B, what appears to be another sock, and it has various writing. Just for identification purposes, the writing contains the numbers 42, C, B, various other writing.
All right, 214B. Proceed.
Thank you. So showing you people's 214A for identification. Maybe we can get a zoom in on the area with the writing near the heel. Okay, do you recognize this item?
Yes, I do.
And is there anything on it that you placed on the item?
Yes.
What?
That whitish notation that's directly on the sock itself, there's a arrow that points, I was going to say left, now down. And now upside down, adjacent to the left of the arrow, is the designation 15A, or excuse me, 13A. It's very hard to write on material with a pen, ink pen.
What number A?
13A.
Okay. And did someone take a cutting from that area?
Yes,
Who did that?
I did.
All right. Now, did you do that on some date after 6/29?
Yes.
Direct your attention to the date of September the 18th. Can you take a look at your notes pertaining to that date and see whether you did any work on the sock?
I'm referring to analyzed evidence report and associated notes. In particular, L 371, 372, 373, and then L partially cut off, it looks like 385.
Sure.
All right, proceed, counsel.
Now, sir, what date did you look at this for the purposes of commencing the testing that you performed?
On September 18th, 1994.
When was the cutting 13A made?
On that same date, I believe.
And when you saw this sock on the September the 18th, at that time, did you see anything that stood out and you recognized as being blood?
Well, initially,
Sustained.
What did you see?
upon removing the socks from the bag, basically I was looking at the same thing as what I'd seen on the 29th. Upon closer examination with different lighting, I was able to discern that there were some stained areas on the sock.
Okay, now when you say that initially, before you used different lighting, you pulled it out and you saw the same thing as on the 29th, what same thing?
Well, the fact that they were black socks that did not have large obvious stains on them.
And then when you say that you took a closer look with different lighting, what did you see?
I was able to discern that there were stained areas on the socks.
And can you describe what these stained areas looked like?
They really just look like a darker area of the sock themselves.
Was one of these stained areas in the area of 13A?
Yes,
But we can't see it on the photograph? Or can
that's
we?
correct.
Let's try to get a little closer to see if we can see anything. I don't know if you can see anything now. I can't make anything out. Maybe, can you see anything on there?
As far as a visible stain,
Yeah.
no, I cannot.
And how long did you have to search when you were looking at it on the 18th before you could actually see something visibly?
Oh, it was probably, once I had them spread out and was down looking at them, initially, I would say I started seeing something within a matter of a minute or two. The thing is, as you get to look at it and as your eyes become accustomed to what you're looking for, it became apparent that there were other stains on the socks.
Now, at that time, could you tell, based upon your training and experience, what you were looking at?
Just by looking at the sock,
Yes.
at that point I just had a darkened area. I didn't know what it was.
So you could not tell for sure that, well, did you form an opinion that it was blood, or was it just you didn't know?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you form any opinions at that time as to what the stain was that you were looking at?
No, I did not.
Okay. Now maybe we can see the other sock that's been marked as People's 113B, I think. 213. I'm sorry, it's 214B.
214A and B. This is 214B.
Right.
All right.
Can we see is that the whole photograph? Okay. So direct your attention now to People's 214B for identification. Does that represent a photograph of one of the other socks as number 13?
That appears to be a black sock, like number 13.
Okay. Now, when you saw this particular black sock or the other black sock, did you see any obvious staining on that?
None obvious, no.
And did you see any upon further examination?
Yes, I did.
What did you see upon further examination?
Same thing. There were some small, kind of darker areas on it that, as you allow your eyes to focus along with having seen the other one, started becoming apparent.
Were they similar to the stains that you saw in the other sock?
Well, similar in general appearance, not necessarily in size or location.
That's what I meant. And at the time that you took a closer look and your eyes adjusted, did you form any opinion at that time as to what the stain was?
No, I did not.
All right, thank you. Now, In your experience, Mr. Matheson, what does dried blood look like?
Kind of depends on what surface it's on, but as blood dries, it gets darker, going from a reddish to a more reddish brown, and eventually can look almost black.
Do you know how long it would take typically a dot of blood that's deposited outdoors on concrete, say, before it turns from a red to a brown?
Objection, no foundation.
Sustained.
Well, have you ever had occasion to observe that, a dot that was red and then later on turned brown?
Yes.
And how long, is that something that you can predict, or does it depend on the circumstances, how long it takes?
Depends on the circumstances.
All right. But as it ages, it does change color.
That's correct.
And with respect to the stains that you've talked about on item number 13, what color were those, if you could detect any color?
All I could see was they were a darker area on these dark socks.
So could you see that they appeared to be black, red, brown, or just darker?
They were just darker.
Now, directing your attention to the date of June the 27th of last year, did you begin to do some testing on that date on item number 18?
Okay, I'm going to again refer to my notes.
17, I'm sorry, in this case.
Yes, I did.
And that's the reference file?
Item number 17, yes, the whole blood vial marked O.J. Simpson.
Now, when you started to do some testing, did you take anything out of the vial?
Yes,
What did you take?
blood.
And how did you take it?
I just take what's called a pipette. It's nothing more than a kind of a glass tube that comes down to almost a point. You have a rubber bulb on the top, insert that into the blood, draw out, approximately a milliliter, which not quite a teaspoon, something like that, and transfer that into what's called a centrifuge tube, a small plastic tube that has a cone shape on the bottom.
And you transfer it from the vial to the centrifuge tube with the pipette?
Yes.
What do you do with the pipette after you made the transfer?
Well, during the course of the analysis, normally the way I set up my analysis on a whole blood vial like this, I have what's called a test tube rack, which is nothing more than a plastic rack with a bunch of plastic prongs sticking up. The tube is placed down in there so it doesn't fall over. I place a clean test tube alongside of it, and then the centrifuge tube. When I'm not using the pipette, it just drops into the clean test tube to hold it.
Maybe I can show you Defense 1124 for identification again. Is this the same type of tube that the reference sample? This is the purple top tube.
It's a purple top tube. I don't know if it's the exact same brand or not.
Okay, but that could be checked by looking at the photograph on our evidence disposition board.
If it's visible in the photograph,
Okay.
yes.
Now, are these tubes, the purple top tubes that you work with in serology, graduated?
No, there's no sort of indication of the volumes. Graduated meaning that there's marks on it that show the different volumes. It's just a glass tube.
Okay. Now, how much of the blood did you actually use in the testing that you commenced on the 27th?
I don't know exactly how much I used.
Can you give us an estimation as to how much you typically use or is consumed in the testing itself?
Normally, there's no records kept as far as they use a small quantity. The approximate milliliter that I mentioned before, I may use for all the testing, depending on whether I retain that centrifuge tube, return it to the blood vial, or whether I discard it. I could use anywhere from Oh, a small portion of that to the whole milliliter, milliliter and a half.
Well, how much do you is typically consumed in an ABO test, for example?
Well, what's actually consumed for the test is about 3 drops of the cells and about 3 drops of the serum.
So the test itself only requires a few drops?
That's correct.
So what do you do with the rest of the item, that the blood that you put into the microcentrifuge tube?
Actually, I've been inconsistent with that. Sometimes I returned it back to the blood vial, and sometimes I discard it.
Do you know what you did in this case?
No, I do not.
Do you know what the habit and custom is of other analysts in your laboratory who are working in serology?
Well, within serology, some retain them, some discard them. We're not consistent with that.
So if you assume in a given case that you've poured out a milliliter of blood, or pipetted out a milliliter of blood into a microcentrifuge tube, and only 3 drops or so were used in the testing, and if you assume that you returned the remainder to the reference vial, how much blood, if any, would be left on the pipetter and on the microcentrifuge tube?
Whether you're going to have some clinging to the walls of both of those, approximation may be 1/4 to 1/3 of the original volume that you've pulled out. The blood's fairly viscous. It'll retain to the sides of the containers.
Can you tell us in milliliters?
Well, given that, I'd say about 1/4 of a milliliter or so.
Have you ever done any experiments or studies to try to figure out, using the technique that you usually use, how much blood is thrown away that was clinging to the sides of the microcentrifuge tube or the pipetter?
No, we've never had to deal with an issue of needing to know that.
Okay. Now, do you make any documentation at or around the time that this is performed on the 27th to record specifically how much blood you used in the analysis or pipetted into the microcentrifuge tube?
No,
Why not?
because it's never been an issue. We've never had to worry about how much was used during the course of the analysis.
Why have you never had to worry about that?
It's never been raised as an issue. We've never had to account for every portion of blood that was supplied to us. Like I mentioned before, in the case of living individuals, we knew that we had a source to get additional sample if it was needed. It just has never been an issue before.
So you don't have any written documents as to specifically whether you use the technique of pouring the microcentrifuge tube back into the reference vial or the technique of throwing the remainder away?
That's correct.
And do you make any recordation when you see the vial on the 27th as to how much was in it when you started?
I have done that in the past. I'd like to reference my notes to see if I did in this case. There is a reference by Mr. Yamauchi as to how much he removed and used. I did not.
Well, I'm talking about the 27th when you commenced your testing.
No, I did not.
And why don't you make any recordation as to how much was in there when you started?
For the same reason, it's never been a issue before. I didn't feel that that was information that needed to be recorded.
So this has not come up previously in your, how many years of experience? Was it 17 at the Los Angeles Police Department?
Well, I haven't been in serology that long, but in my time in serology, I've never had to provide this information before.
Now, I'd like to look back for a moment at the document that we marked, the inventory, which was Peoples 213 for identification. And this is the same page that we showed you before from 629.
Yes.
And on this page, did you write something out with respect to item number 17 as to how much was in the vial at that time?
Yes, I did.
What did you write?
I recorded 2 mLs, which stands for 2 milliliters.
Now, how did you come up with that figure?
It was an estimate. We opened up the envelope, held up the tube, and made a guess, or an estimate as to what percentage of the vial.
So you didn't use any measuring technique in terms of a ruler or comparing it to another vial in order to come up with 2 milliliters?
No, I did not.
Now, in your experience in serology, do you have a lot of experience in dealing with these purple top tubes, estimating or guesstimating how much is in them?
Well, in that, no, I don't. I know the total volume of it, and that's what I based my guess on, but it's not something that we do on a regular basis. And, I don't have a lot of experience estimating the quantity.
Well, one would think that over the 13 years, seeing these tubes over and over again, you kind of get a sense of what 2 milliliters looks like as opposed to 3 milliliters. Is that not true?
Well, you'd get a sense if you measured it. The way you get experience, the way you learn something is by doing it. And like I said, we have not measured the quantity of blood in vials as on a regular basis within the laboratory.
So when you had occasion, did you have occasion to look at this vial again for the purposes of actually measuring it after the 29th?
Yes, I did.
And directing your attention to September, excuse me. January the 4th of 1995. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry, September the 21st of 1994. Did you take a look at the vial again?
We're referring again to my notes and a chronology page labeled L521 for 9/21/94. Yes, I did.
And did you measure it on that occasion?
Yes, I did.
How did you measure it?
At that point, what I did is took a blood vial of similar shape and size, but empty, placing it alongside of the blood vial, item number 17, filled up the empty vial with water to visually the same level as the other one, and then measured the quantity of water that was equivalent to the amount of blood.
How many times in the past had you done that procedure?
Oh, I've probably just done it a couple of times. It is not a common situation.
Do you know how long ago it was prior to September the 21st that you had last done that procedure?
No, I do not.
Okay. But you think that you've only done it a couple of times before that?
Yeah, I don't remember any specific instance, but the fact that I figured out that that's how to do it in this case, I would assume that at some point I must have done it before.
Now, when you did that, how much was in it?
I determined to be present in the blood vial along with the centrifuge tube that was also in the package for there to be 3.8 or approximately 3.8 milliliters of blood.
So when you saw it on the 29th during the inventory
Of June.
of June, you said that there was 2 milliliters, and then when you saw it again on the 21st of September, you said that there was 3.8.
That's correct.
So there's a 1.8 milliliter difference.
Yes.
And do you think that you could be 1.8 milliliters off in making a guesstimate as to how much was in the tube?
Objection,
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Well, how accurate do you believe you are in making a guesstimate as to something in one of these purple top tubes?
Objection. Estimate.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
How accurate do you think you are in estimating what's in one of those tubes?
Obviously not very. I was far off.
Okay. And how do you know that the 3.8 was accurate?
Well, because I used a legitimate technique to actually measure it as opposed to just holding a vial up and eyeballing it.
Okay. And that was the technique of filling the other vial up with water.
That's correct.
Do you have any idea what the margin of error is in that technique?
In that technique, I would say it's probably fairly small. That's why I said approximately 3.8 milliliters. My guess is that the error on that would be less than 0.1 or 0.2 milliliters.
Okay.
Object. We're just trying to guesstimate.
Oh, well.
All right. Now, had you ever seen anyone else measure that vial in your presence?
No,
I'm not talking about by the test tube method, but by any other method.
not that I recall.
Now, on the same date, on September the 21st, rather, did you also measure the contents of the vial number 60 and also 59?
Yes, I did.
And did you use the same technique?
The technique involving equivalent amount of water, yes.
Can you give us the measurements on those two?
Yes. For item number 59, the blood vial, I found approximately 7.2 milliliters of blood, and for item number 60, approximately 5.5 milliliters of blood.
And then on September the 27th, did you give release some blood to a defense expert, Mr. Regal?
Again, referring to my notes, a handwritten receipt labeled L309. Yes, I did. I released approximately 1 milliliter of blood from item number 59, marked Brown, Simpson, Nicole, and approximately 1 milliliter of blood from item number 60, marked Goldman, Ronald.
Did you give anything else to Mr. Regal at that time in terms of reference blood?
Yes, I did.
What?
At that time, I also cut out for him approximately a 1-inch square section of each of item number 72 and 82, which were the blood swatches that were provided to us from the two victims from the coroner's office.
And then on September the 30th, did you release some more blood to Mr. Regal?
Referring to my notes, there is a handwritten receipt marked as L310, and on that date, September 30th, 1994, I released approximately 1 milliliter of blood to Mr. Regal from the tube, item number 17, marked O.J. Simpson.
Now, how did you come up with the approximate of 1 milliliter for the 27th of September and the 30th of September?
For doing that, I used with a pipetter, as opposed to the glass pipette, which is not graduated or not mentioned before. We have mechanical pipetters that you can set to withdraw and deliver a specific amount of a fluid. And that's what I used in this case, transferring from the vial into the centrifuge tubes previously described.
Do you know who Mr. Regal is?
Yes, I do.
Who is he?
He is retired, the previous director of the Orange County Crime Laboratory.
And is he now, was he working for the defense at that time?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Now, sir, directing your attention to the date of January the 9th of 1994, did you return some evidence on that date from serology to the evidence control unit?
January 994.
95, I'm sorry.
Okay, again, referring to, there's actually many notes under that date. Yes, I did.
And can you tell us with respect to the reference files, items 17, 59, and 60 in this case, whether you returned those items in a sealed condition to the evidence control unit?
Yes, I did.
What other items did you return on that date?
On that date, I returned, we had been storing up to that date many of the blood or biological evidence items in the serology freezer. And at that point, I inventoried and returned these items. I can go through the list if you like.
Yeah, I know it's a little time consuming, but if you could.
Okay, there was one package that included items 72 through 74.
Is there a document that we can use instead for this purpose if there are multiple items?
I don't know if there is a document that doesn't have significant other writing on it.
All right, proceed.
And that same package also contained item number 82 through 85. There was one package that contained item number 115 through 117. Another package that contained item number 170 through 175. Another package to contain item number 293 through 309. Another package ordered to contain item number 118 through 120. An additional package marked to contain item number 78 through 80 and 86 and 87. Another package marked to contain item number 91, 93, and 94 through 102. A box that was marked to contain item numbers 1 through 9, 11 through 14, 20 through 34, 37 through 39, 41 through 45,
Slow down.
47 through 52, and 54 through 57. I believe that was the last one.
And when you returned those items to the evidence control unit, were they returned in a sealed condition?
Yes, they were.
And I'd like to turn to some of the testing that you performed in this case, Mr. Matheson. First of all, when blood evidence is collected from a crime scene and then submitted to the serology laboratory for analysis, what kind of information are you as a serologist looking for to derive from that blood evidence?
Well, first off, we want to know whether in fact it is blood. If that's what we have, if there is blood present, we want to know whether or not that blood is human in origin. And if that is a fact, then we continue on to identify the different genetic markers that might be present or identifiable in a blood stain or an exemplar blood sample.
And are the tests that you perform in serology known as tests of exclusion?
That's a term for it, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, the idea being is there aren't any tests, particularly in conventional serology, that would make a definitive match between a blood stain and a particular individual. They can merely include somebody. In particular, they can exclude somebody. If you're doing an analysis and you find a marker that is in a stain that is not in a reference sample, then you can say absolutely that that blood stain could not have come from that individual. It's an exclusion.
When you are doing your testing, do you have to decide what genetic markers that you're going to test for in a given stain?
Sometimes it depends on the quantity.
Now, when you're going about deciding what kind of test you're going to perform, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to include the suspect or exclude the suspect?
Now, the idea, if you have to limit your test due to sample size or some other consideration, the idea is to try and find the test that is most likely to exclude a particular person.
Well, why is it that you do it that way?
Well, you want to get the most information possible. The idea is to find out whether or not a sample could or could not have come from somebody. And if you only have one shot on it, you want to do the one that's most likely to exclude somebody.
Can you give us an example of picking a genetic marker to test for the purposes of exclusion as opposed to picking one in order to try to include someone?
Yes, we have a variety of markers that are available to us. Some are better at differentiating between two stains than other ones. An example might be an enzyme that goes by the initials of ADA. Approximately in the neighborhood of 94 to 97% of the population is a type 1. The remainder of the population is a type 2, 1, or a 2. If you use that test, odds are, 94 to 97% of the time, you're going to get a type 1, and that doesn't give you a whole lot of information. There's another test that goes by the initials of PGM or PGM subtyping that rather than having a choice of a 1, a 2, 1, or a 2, you have 10 different possible combinations. And your likelihood then of having, if a blood stain in fact did not come from a particular person, the likelihood of excluding under that system is much better than the one I previously described.
So when you say that you're trying to pick out tests to exclude, what would that mean in reference to the two examples that you gave us?
So it means I would choose the PGM subtype system as my best choice of between the two of them. My odds are if I choose ADA, I'm going to include them because most people are the same type. My odds are better of excluding using the other system.
Now, you've been using a term that you said, a term called genetic marker. What do you mean when you're talking about genetic marker?
Well, genetic marker is something that exists within the human body. The term genetic means that it's derived from your parents. You have to have a certain combination of types because of the genetic information that's supplied to you by your parents. A marker just means it's something that we can use to identify something within the system. An example of a genetic marker is the ABO blood typing system. You're a type A, type B, type O, or type AB. Your type is determined by the types of your parents, making it genetic, and it's a way of distinguishing potentially two blood samples.
Well, when you use this term genetic marker, are you implying in that the tests that you have done are DNA type tests?
No.
Why is the term genetic marker used then?
Well, the term genetic marker had been around for quite a bit longer than forensic DNA testing. Like I mentioned before, genetic merely refers to the fact that it's determined, it's inherited, it's determined by your parents.
So could you view something like eye color, different people having different color eyes as being a genetic marker? Would that be an appropriate usage of the term?
As an analogy or an example, eye color could be considered a genetic marker. Your eye color is determined by heredity from your parents.
And have you heard of the term polymorphic?
Yes, I have.
What does that mean?
That refers to a situation where you have something within the body, let's say the ABO blood type system, that exists, performs the same function in every person, but exists in different forms.
So again, I'm not sure if this analogy would be proper, but could you view eye color then as being a polymorphism in that different people have different colored eyes, but all eyes hopefully perform the same task?
That's correct. An eye, you see through it, but the eye color is different, but doesn't affect the process.
Now, are these markers, these genetic markers that you're testing for, are they polymorphic?
Yes, they are. Otherwise, there would not be a reason to do it.
Now, how many of these polymorphic enzymes are used in forensic testing?
Oh, I'm not sure the exact number. I believe we within our laboratory regularly use 7 or 8, something like that. I'd have to refer to some notes to remember exactly.
Are there many more genetic markers in people's blood in addition to those 7 or 8?
Yes.
And how are those chosen?
Well, the choice as to what to use forensically is you want something that gives you a good percentage breakdown of the population. In other words, the one I mentioned before, the ADA, is actually a poor polymorphic enzyme in that the majority of the people are the exact same type. We use it for other reasons because it's very stable. You want a marker, it'd be perfect if you had one that had, say, 4 different types and each type was 25% of the population. You also need a stable, or a system in forensics that is stable because our samples by nature are outside the body, they are deposited in a variety of different places and begin to degrade. You want something that doesn't degrade very quickly.
When you say stable, is that what you're talking about, that they don't degrade as easily?
That's correct.
Do these blood type markers that you're testing for, do they change through someone's lifetime?
No, they do not. They stay consistent.
And is it possible, when you've done a test on a variety of these markers, to calculate some sort of a percentage of the population that has those markers?
Yes, it is.
Now, you used the term ABO blood type system, and you gave us a description of that. And you said there are how many types?
There are the 4 common types, A, B, O, and AB.
And in addition to this ABO system, is there another set of systems that you're looking at when you're testing for genetic markers?
Yes.
What is that?
Well, there are a variety of them that are called enzymes, which is a chemical that exists in your body to perform function to help keep you alive. And there are a number of these enzymes that are polymorphic, exist in different types, and can be identified.
Can you just give us a simple explanation of what an enzyme is?
Well, an enzyme is something that catalyzes or makes a reaction occur. Simply, it performs a function within your body that your body needs to exist.
All right, Mr. Goldberg, would this be an appropriate point?
Sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess for the morning. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case, conduct any deliberations, or allow anybody to communicate with you. We'll stand in recess for 15 minutes, and Mr. Matheson, you may step down, sir. All right. All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. All the parties are again present. Jury is not present. All right, let's have the jurors, please. now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Gregory Matheson is again on the witness stand undergoing direct examination by Mr. Goldberg. And Mr. Goldberg, you may continue.
Thank you. Mr. Matheson, yesterday you were testifying about using a process called electrophoresis.
That's correct.
And can you tell us what that is?
Electrophoresis is a technique that is used to identify the different enzyme types, these polymorphic enzymes that we were talking about before.
So is electrophoresis used on ABO or just the enzymes?
Well, in the case of the type of testing we're talking about here, it's not used in the ABO, it's used in enzymes, and it's used in other purposes too.
Right. And can you give us a explanation of how the electrophoresis technique works?
Well, like in the ABO system where you have different types that can be identified, in these enzymes they also exist in different types. Example being PGM that I mentioned earlier. In its simple form, it's a type 1, a type 2-1, and a 2. Each of these types differ slightly in their structure or their charge. That's one of the ways we use to tell them apart. The electrophoretic technique involves taking a glass plate that's approximately about 8 inches square, pouring what's called an agarose gel on it, which is kind of like a jello-like substance on the top of it, placing the samples on, like you take small portions of the blood or the cloth, absorb it onto threads, insert it down into the gel, all in a line. This then is placed on a cooling bath, and electricity is allowed to run through it from one side to the other in one direction. And this basically kind of pushes the enzymes along, and they travel at different rates based on this charge that's on them, the slight differences. After a predetermined amount of time, you stop that electrical process and put chemicals on them over the top that work with the enzymes so you can see where the band's lined up. In most of the systems, you identify the type by the quantity and location of these bands on the gel. And in some systems, you do it as far as location and quantity along with the intensity or the darkness or brightness of each of the individual bands.
So after running this electrophoresis gel, you get some kind of a banding pattern?
That's correct.
And then what do you do with that banding pattern after it appears?
Well, each different type of an enzyme will give a unique banding pattern, so you're then able to interpret it. You don't just do it from memory, though. On each of those gels or each of the plates that I was talking about, which with the system that we have set up, we can run up to 12 samples on it. Out of those 12 samples, 3 or 4 of them may be control or known samples of all the different types that are present in the system. So you'd have a situation where you'd have a sample, a control, a couple samples, and a control. That way you can make direct comparisons between your unknown samples and your known types and make the call and determine what type it is.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to mark as people's next in order. It's 2:15 for identification. Another board entitled Evidence Testing Demonstration.
All right, 2:15. Can we put that up just a little higher? 1492, can you see that? Up a little? All right, thank you. Mr. Goldberg.
Thank you. So direct your attention to this Exhibit 215 for identification. The first photograph, photograph number 1, door to serology. Have that on the Elmo. What does that photograph depict?
It depicts the door into the serology lab from that hallway from the chart that kind of goes around in a square around the laboratory itself. It also shows, we were talking about windows before, though there are no windows to the outside, each of the laboratories has a couple of windows that look from the lab itself into the hallway.
So from the hallway, you can see what's going on inside the laboratory.
In most areas, some areas you can't see.
Right. Now, directing your attention to cell number 2 on this demonstration exhibit, what does that show?
That's a photograph that's taken if you were to walk just inside of the door, shown in cell 1, and turn to the left. It looks down through the serology laboratory. What you see on the left is a personal workbench area, or one of the areas of one of our criminalists. To the right, you can just barely make out a little bit of a layout table, and then farther back on the right is one of our group or analytical areas.
And can you see where the electrophoresis machines are kept in this particular photograph?
Yes, you can.
Where's that?
By using the pointer towards the right of the photograph, you can see these reddish ends. Those are all the electrophoresis cooling plates or cooling tanks that I talked about earlier.
Now, direct your attention to cell number 3 on this exhibit. What does this show?
Okay, as I described in the process before in the electrophoresis, you pour a gel on a plate that's about 8 inches square or something like that. That is depicted in the picture, one of those plates. The gel is on the glass part there that you actually can't see the gel because it's clear. Then there's a row of slits that are put in it where the samples are introduced. It's called loading the gel. Each one of these red marks that you see is indicative of either a unknown sample or a control or known sample.
And going through the 4 items here, can you tell us where the unknown samples would be as opposed to the known samples?
Well, my practice in running a gel is I put a unknown in the first, a known sample in the second, unknown in the third and the fourth, and then a known one would go in the 5th spot.
Okay, when you say unknown, you're talking about what?
Anytime I refer to an unknown sample, it's an evidence sample. We don't know the results of it at this point.
Okay, and the known is what?
The known is a portion of blood that we know the source of that blood, and we've already characterized and know what the types of them are.
And is that what you use to compare the unknown against?
Yes.
Now, after the plate is loaded, what's done with the plate?
Okay, the plate then is laid in this the 4th cell here that's marked electrophoresis. The white part in between the 2 red ends is a cooling plate. There's a bath or a mechanism not too far away from here which has a refrigerant in it that lowers the temperature of the water. The water is then circulated back and forth through these plates so that the electrophoresis gel is kept at a low temperature. So it's laid on top of that.
And finally, if we look at the 5th cell where it says run gel, what is this showing?
Okay, this shows a couple of different tanks side by side. The right one here has a gel laying on the cooling bath. To actually run the electrophoresis system, there's white, what are filter paper called wicks on either side of it. They are in a tank that has a buffer solution. The wicks are laid across the edges of the gel on both sides, and then there's cords that go up to the power supply located towards the top of the picture, and electricity is run through the buffer, through the wicks, across the gel, and then back into the power supply. They have to be kept cold because most of our systems in this type run at approximately 350, 400 volts, and that would, if there wasn't a cooling system, it would actually heat the gels up and dry them out, and the process wouldn't work.
Now, if this were a real case and this evidence were to be run, what would you have to do after the item had been, the gel had been placed on the plate as depicted in cell 5?
Like
Do you close, is that door, the plexiglass door, closed or what?
Well, right, like I mentioned, the wicks would have to be laid from the tanks onto the edges of the gel. You'd close this lid because you don't want to come in contact with the voltage that's running through it, and the wires that are at the back of the unit are placed into the power supply, which is above it.
Now, if we could go back to cell number 4 for a second. Can you point out for us where it is that the samples are that have been loaded onto the gel in this photograph?
They're a little tough to see, but what you see that the gel is being held up. The gel is on a piece of glass, being held up on its side, and they're the reddish spots that show up about 2 inches or so from the bottom of the gel.
So are those closer to the analyst's right hand or left hand?
They're closer to his right hand.
And can you tell us, using this photograph, when the machine is hooked up and the electricity is actually running through it, can you describe for us what happens?
Well, as far as, like I mentioned in the description before, the current runs through it. There's a positive side and a negative side, and it runs from the a negative side and a positive side. It runs from the negative to the positive side, and the enzymes that are present in there, they are such that they move along through the gel at a slightly different rate depending on the structure of them, and the structure is what determines the type.
So which way do they move? As it's placed on the machine this way, would they go from his right hand to his left hand or the other way?
Well, it depends on the system. This system here that he's setting up appears to be a PGM subtype system that we use, and it would be running from the right to the left.
And when they run from the right to the left, can you actually see some sort of a banding pattern with your naked eye after it's finished?
No, you cannot.
What do you have to do in order to see that?
After the runtime, you remove this gel from the cooling plate, and you have prepared what are called development chemicals. And they are optimized for a particular enzyme system. The chemicals contain, or the solution contains chemicals that react with the enzyme so that we can see them. Normally, if it's a visible thing that you can see with your eye in white light, it's a dark bluish, almost black type of band forms. There's other type that react with what are called fluorescent chemicals, and you have to look at them under ultraviolet light.
And after the plate is run and the development chemicals are put on, is something done to preserve that plate?
Yes, the plate itself is not preserved. However, the results are photographed. They're actually photographed several times throughout the development process. It doesn't just pop up all at once. It slowly becomes visible in most of the systems, and you take pictures along the way.
All right. And do you read your results off the plate or off the photographs?
Actually, to some extent, both. You read them from both of them.
How complex is this technique? How complex was this for you to learn how to do this technique?
Well, it's not a terribly easy technique, but it also isn't difficult. I was able to, I mentioned yesterday a course that I took back at the FBI Academy, which lasted about 2 weeks in duration. During that 2 weeks, I went into it with having used this technique maybe less than half a dozen times or so, just practicing in the laboratory. And within the 2 weeks, I became fairly proficient at running samples.
Now, thank you. You said it was possible to calculate the frequencies of people that have different genetic markers that you've tested. Is there a rule known as the product rule that you apply in doing this?
Yes.
What is that?
What that is it allows you to determine the types of different markers that you identify in a stain. It's possible to, just through statistics, going back to the ABO blood typing system, that a certain percentage of the population is a type A, a certain percentage B, and so on. This is also true of the different enzymes that I'm talking about. So once you have identified the type, say in 2 different markers, ABO blood system and maybe this PGM system that we've talked about, you can multiply together the percentages of each of the types that are present and come out with a smaller percentage of the population that has those 2 types together.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, starting with the ABO system, about roughly half of the population is a type O, or about 50% of the population. If that was the only test that was available for us, we could analyze, say, a blood stain, we determine that it is a type O, and the best information out of that is that half the people in this room could have contributed that blood stain. Well, then we'd go ahead and run one of these additional genetic markers, and let's say out of that we identify a type that also exists in 50% of the population. Well, now we have two pieces of information. You can multiply those two together, and now you know that that stain down there that is an ABO type O plus this other marker exists in about 25% of the population, or about 1 of every 4 people rather than 1 out of every 2. With each additional marker you add, you keep multiplying that percentage, and the number of possible people that could have left a stain gets smaller and smaller.
So if you had a third marker in your hypothetical that was also 50%, would you multiply the 25 times 50 for 12 and a half?
Yeah, I'm going to object and move to strike that last answer as being a lack of foundation, and I think we need to approach on this.
Oh,
Yes, that's correct. With each additional marker, if it was half, you'd keep cutting the number in half. It would go from 1 in 4 to 1 in 8 to 1 in 16, and so on.
And is this use of the product rule in calculating the percentage of the population that has a given set of genetic markers, one that is accepted in the forensic science community?
Yes, it is.
For how long has this been used,
which?
if you know, the product rule in terms of applying it in this context with ABO systems and the other genetic markers?
Well, discussion phase, other genetic markers.
Sustain.
Well, the ABO system plus the other enzymes systems that you type.
Objection.
What systems?
Well, you said that there are about 8 or so enzyme systems that you type.
That we have the capability of typing in our laboratory,
Okay.
yes.
And is that pretty standard throughout the forensic community, that those are the systems that are used?
With some slight variation, but yes, it's a core set.
With respect to the systems that you are using in your laboratory, how long, if you know, has the product rule been used to calculate the frequencies of those systems together with ABO?
Well, it has been used in our laboratory since I started, which was in 1978. And I believe as the markers have become available, they've been used with each new one as it is developed.
Okay. Now, in terms of the conventional serology and the electrophoresis tests that you've been discussing this morning, is there a problem with cross-contamination between the samples as you're doing the test?
I'm sorry, you repeat the question?
Is there a problem with cross-contamination as you're testing these items?
If I understand what you're saying, I mean, you always want to be careful that you don't allow one item to come in contact with another one so that you have the potential of transferring information between the two.
How sensitive is this particular test?
Well, these,
Sustain.
How much of a sample do you need in order to be able to test an item of evidence using electrophoresis?
for the systems that we use, we need a sample that has, some color to it, towards a pale to dark red, approximately a 1/4 inch long, thread-sized is about the amount of sample you need to get a good result.
And if we were to define contamination as being introducing something onto a piece of biological evidence that was to cause the evidence to be mistyped, what would you need to do in order to contaminate biological evidence using that definition?
Well, in the area of the conventional type of typing we're talking about, you don't get results with samples that you can't see. It would have to be a sufficient quantity that you're visibly seeing that you're transferring sample from one to the other.
So it would be something that you would visually see?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, has there ever been a problem of contamination, as I've defined it, inside of your laboratory in the serology section?
a problem as far as contamination in the conventional systems?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And in the area of PCR testing, do you use kits that are manufactured by an outside firm?
Yes, we do.
Who does that come from?
The company's changed hands a couple times. It was originally Cetus. I believe it's Roche Biochemicals now.
Okay. And with respect to those kits, to your knowledge, has there ever been any defect in the kits that you were supplied?
Well, I was made aware of a time in our laboratory where we were getting results showing up in our controls and other areas in the process that was eventually, we believe, traced back to a particular lot of kits.
Was that prior to June 14th of last year?
Yes, it was.
Can you give us an estimation of how much prior?
At least a couple months. I'm not exactly sure of the date.
And what was this problem?
Well, we were showing a type within that system was typable or becoming apparent in our controls in areas where we were not expecting to see any result at all.
What do you mean it was becoming apparent in the controls?
Well, there are controls built into the system that allow you to check whether or not there is a presence of contamination. Contamination is a fact of life when it comes to forensic samples. So you always have controls built in, both the controls that are picked up at the scene, plus controls that are introduced at different stages of the testing that should come out blank when you're all done, should not yield a result. And if a result is obtained during, in some of these controls, it shows that there is some sort of contamination occurring.
And did the controls in fact work for that purpose in this incident?
Yes, they did.
Now, was this a incident that you were personally involved in or had personal involvement with?
No.
Did you ever read any documentation around the time that it occurred pertaining to the incident?
No, I did not.
And how was it resolved?
I was advised by the people that were doing the test that upon receiving a new lot kit from the company, we were no longer seeing that type showing up in our controls.
When you say a lot, what are you talking about?
Well, when things are produced or manufactured, they put a lot number on it so that you can track. I would assume they came from the same batch of chemicals or whatever in the factory, but there is a assigned lot number to a sequence of reagents or kits.
Okay. Now, going back to conventional testing for a moment, in the area of conventional testing, does the laboratory take proficiency tests?
Yes.
And what are those?
Well, we subscribe to a couple of different outside companies that supply us with unknown samples. One of them is Collaborative Testing Service, and the other is CAP, or the College of American Pathologists. They send us case-like samples. We don't know the results of them. And as supervisor, I'd receive these items and either divide, if there was sufficient sample, divide them up between a number of the analysts within the laboratory, or if it was a small sample, assign it to one particular analyst. And they would test them. We would then submit our results to whatever company it happened to be, and then get the results back from them at a later time.
And do you also take proficiency tests in the area of PCR testing in your laboratory?
Yes.
And how's that done?
The similar process. As a matter of fact, both CAP and CTS now are gearing them more towards the DNA process than conventional.
And have those proficiency tests been passed?
Yes.
And we were talking a little bit about the substrate controls and the use of the controls yesterday. When you're doing your conventional testing, do you use those controls in any way?
Yes, I do for part of the testing.
For what part do you use them?
I use them during the course of determining whether or not a sample is human and in the ABO testing.
When you use a substrate control, or when you use substrate controls in this case, did you use the entire cloth square or a portion of it?
Just a portion.
What do you do with it in order to take a portion?
I would open up the bindle that contains it, and I would make a cutting from it that is appropriate size for the test that I want to run. I may not do a cutting. Sometimes I'll actually take tweezers or forceps and tease out a couple of the threads or fibers that are present.
And why is that used in the ABO system?
It's because it's known that there are things out there besides ABO substances that will give activity or results that can mimic or look like ABO. Certain types of cloth can tend to give you what's called a false positive for an ABO antigen, which is one of the things we look at when we're typing for the ABO system. And you want to know if the surface where you're staying on is going to have this type of activity present.
Was the laboratory using substrate controls prior to the use of PCR technology?
Yes.
And was it because of the ABO system, for the reasons that you just described, that you did that?
Yes, that's correct.
What about for the other genetic markers that you're typing? Do you use the substrate controls for that?
No, I do not.
Why do you not use them for those?
Well, as opposed to the ABO system, where I mentioned there are things out there that can mimic the same type of activity, that is not true for the enzyme systems that we use.
And what about the idea of testing them for the purposes of determining whether there was any typable information on the substrate control? Why wouldn't you do that when you're doing electrophoresis?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I do use it for the human test, and if that comes up negative, there is no biological material present that it would give me a result.
Would you expect to get any result on electrophoresis if you saw a substrate control that had no visible blood on it?
If we're talking about a blood stain, no, I would not.
Okay. Now, in June and September of last year, did you do certain testing on some of the items bearing the DR number of this case?
Yes, I did.
And did you generate reports related to that testing?
Yes.
This time I'd like to mark what's called the serology results chart as people's next in order,
That'd be
216.
216. It could be.
Sir, directing your attention to people's 216 for identification. Have you seen this chart before?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Goldberg, didn't we mark this earlier as 202?
The chart?
Ms. Martinez confirms that we did.
Yes, you did.
All right.
We did.
All right. People's 202. Mr. Goldberg.
Thank you. Sir, showing you people's 202 for identification, does that summarize information that was contained on reports that you generated in connection with your testing in this case?
It summarizes information from the reports plus some additional information from some of the notes.
All right. Now, starting first with the notes, what kind of notes do you generate when you're testing items contemporaneously with the testing?
Well, while the testing is going on, what is prepared is a serology case summary sheet, which will eventually have a summary of all the results on each of the items. While I'm doing this, I'm referring to some notes I have of my analysis from June of 1994, just so I can make sure I remember all the different forms. So I described there's a serology case summary sheet. There is also what has been previously described serology item description notes. Those are the notes where we give a little bit more detailed description of the actual item. And then there are what are called electrophoresis worksheets that are created during the electrophoresis process. Each plate that you saw earlier will have a sheet that goes along with it to identify the different samples and where they are located on the gel. There may also be just note pages, blank pages. Sometimes we'll write on the back of some of these for some additional information.
And are the notations, the notes that you just referred to, ones that have been labeled with L numbers and provided to both sides in discovery?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, which are the reports that are done at the time of the test? Which are the two types of reports that are done contemporaneously with the test?
Well, the type that is done contemporaneously with the test, the electrophoresis worksheet, which would go along with each of the electrophoresis runs I described. There is also, I mentioned that sometimes we'll take notes on the back of a page. In the ABO blood typing test, we don't have necessarily a form where that's recorded. A lot of times we just write the raw data on the back of one of the other pages, and that's done while you're actually doing the analysis.
And what type of information, or where did the information come from that was used to compile this chart? Was it just the reports, the analyzed evidence reports, or also the electrophoresis worksheets?
I believe information that went onto this report came from my reports, or they were put on this came from my reports. Combination of that, the case summary sheet and the electrophoresis worksheets.
Now, does this particular chart